Just kind of kicking off at the top, this section, Chapter 8, opens with a bit of a peroration about the need for avoiding reductive understandings of human nature, and yet finding ways to realistically assess what we're doing in education. It's the question of how do we deal with a natural process without reducing it to kind of a materialistic analysis of humanity. So what are some examples of reductive understandings of what a human being is that we encounter in the wild?
I mean,
there's lots.
Yeah.
So what are some? What are some that we actually have to tangle with?
I think one of the things that's obviously to the heart of this chapter, the book as a whole, and that I imagine Sam and I for sure encounter every day, is just the idea that you measure a student in terms of the artifacts they produce.
Yeah.
You are what you can do for me, and what you can do for me or for the class or for yourself, however you want to phrase that, is who you are as a student.
Human beings on a fundamental relational level as creatures of contract, I think, to go back
Absolutely.
to certainly our society. It's that everything is contract, and as contract can be revoked, can be broken, provided you do it in the right way.
Absolutely, yeah.
I started talking before I hit the button, so I'm rewinding a second to
I
say
thought I would-
we were just answering. What are some examples of reductive understandings, like we talked about in the opening of this chapter here? And what I heard was specifically a kind of a reduction to the agreements you make, like reduction to whatever other people can hold you to, or something like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. And here's how it would manifest to get more concrete in our example. The student who may be a star pupil,
Right.
who is offended at a grade that is lower than they have come to expect because I did all the things you asked. And what they mean by that is I showed up to class and I paid attention and I took all of the steps you said I should take.
Right.
And that is almost a contractual obligation to being rewarded with what they see as the superlative reward, which is a good grade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just in the education context. But that's bigger than obviously just in education. That manifests in, I think, in our cultural climate, also different movements of various stripes of children emancipating themselves from parents, and seeing this grand movement in our culture to encouraging the definition of abuse in relationships, like between children and parents, friendship, within friendships, to include everybody with whom you have relationship troubles, and that being a grounds for severing those relationships, right? So, and there's even a term for it, it's condoing friendships, right? So that's also back to this idea that all relationships are contractual.
Yeah, right.
Right, and that you can go into them
Opt
and
in or
exit
opt
them, opt in and opt out, and that those are equally valid choices, depending on how you're feeling.
So that feels like two slightly different things. One is a general sense that any prior constraint on my sense of what I want to do now, anything that, like, yeah, you already knew you couldn't do that. Any such kind of prior restraint, I should say, is or constraint, you have to do this, you knew you had to do this, right, is somehow automatically illegitimate or abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other, which is related to it, this thing of this very transactional character of interaction. Yes. I'm curious though, I heard a leader in local charter schools once argue to a room full of teachers that sure, in theory, we should be able to just focus on like providing what we know to students, and that's great. But it turns out that we're too lazy to do that, which is why we have to have all of these specific standards and things which hold us to delivering what we promised the student we would deliver. I guess I think there is a case out there that is made that as educators we like to make a cop-out on this, where we say, the student comes to us and says, but I did all the things you said, why am I not getting a result? And we say, mystery. How is that not what we're saying?
Do we say mystery?
Well, kind of. That's how it sounds to people who don't agree with us.
If you stick to your grade, yeah.
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 I mean, if I give you a course outline and you work really hard and you do all of the things, right, and then you don't get a good grade.
And the explanation is mystery.
Well, what is the explanation? How do I justify the fact that you didn't get a good grade? Because yes, in this very, very contractual, I show up to do the thing, you give me the paycheck kind of view of how education works, there's a rough justice to
But
that claim.
I think
I did the stuff, I should get a result.
it's never just about. So if you have a purely contractual system, ironically enough, it becomes uncontractual very, very quickly because it's not actually how we're designed to operate. And so, I mean, this is the problem with unfettered capitalism. Is when you try to maximize virtues such as free adults consenting to mutually understood terms or whatever, that's not how those things actually end up being acted out. And if you look at the structure of these things, almost always people throw their influence around. People assume that, well, this is all kind of just a game anyway, and so if I at least did something, you should recognize that. And very, very quickly, something that seemed contractual at the beginning actually turns out to be basically the opposite, where you have sort of competing claims to how the right to determine this thing, which in some sense is fake anyway, if I'm making any sense. So like if I have a student who's mad at me about me not giving them the grade they think they did, and they've said something along the lines of, but I did the things that we agreed to do. I think in some sense what's driving their ire at me is the fact that this agreement is just a placeholder for this thing we're calling education, which in some sense is just a step I have to take socially anyway. So as long as I tried, it shouldn't matter.
Yeah, that's, and I would add, in about the element of mystery, usually there's a tell, and this relates to the virtues and maybe particularly fortitude, is it usually a student who's coming in, turning in an assignment that is, I did all of the steps you asked me to do. Usually there's a lack of actual engagement with the project, and it shines through their writing. Like there's no skin in the game, and that's something you can tell students. You didn't actually adopt a position, you described positions. So there's usually a pretty large tell there.
Well, because you're setting up both parties to fail because you actually can't act out that kind of agreement because it's not how we operate.
Right. Yes.
It's not how human beings perform.
Mm-hmm.
I still feel like we're skating on top of this question.
There's no question.
I still feel like we're skating on top. Alan, you're a parent. You're parents. I'm the only non-parent. But Alan, you've got a grown son now, so I can use you as an example because he's well out of the house. All right. Sean comes home, and he's really frustrated with the teacher because he really did, in fact, try to get all the things done. He feels like he never got it. He never got what the teacher really wanted, but he did all the stuff that was on the assignment sheet, and he still got what he thinks is a really weak grade. And he's complaining to you about it. What are you looking for from the teacher to make you decide whether the teacher just did a crap job of explaining the assignment, or whether your son isn't getting it. And what are you looking for? What are you looking for here?
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to come up with some kind of agreed upon criteria that can be objectively both agreed upon, determined if you fulfilled. I mean,
In some sense, that's what caused the problem in the first place, right?
yeah.
Or is it?
Well,
I mean,
I'm going to take the word objective out of court because I think that's a vexed word that gets in our way. I want a different word, but that's only because it creates a side conversation.
I guess though, in their explanation of why they gave him the grade that they gave him, if I get a sense of, and I know this is just my own personal, if I get a sense of little man syndrome, that will really set me off.
That's awesome.
And so,
Well, that's fair because that does happen.
If this is just a power play of the
Yeah.
teacher over the student,
Well,
then I would object to that.
Yeah,
But
right.
if they could explain, like Gabriel said, that I'm trying to make your kid into a better person and teach him this virtue, then I would be okay with that.
Yeah.
So I can say from experience,
Yeah.
he had a baseball coach,
Uh-huh.
and
Ooh, I like examples. Thank you.
Yeah.
this is good.
the baseball coach was nothing about winning.
Mhm.
It was about trying to raise young men
Mhm.
or young, kids into being men.
Mhm.
And so in
Wait,
learning,
men don't like winning?
they do, but-
Please go ahead with
Yeah.
your very good
Yeah.
example. Ignore my silliness.
And so what he said, always kind of, I trusted him that that's what he was trying to do with my son. And so when my son would complain about him,
Mhm.
I'd say, you need to listen and learn, because I trusted that that's what he wanted for my son.
Yeah.
And he's the reason he's in the Navy.
Yeah.
And so he did trust him, and so.
Well, and I think it's really fair to say that if you have a coach or a drill instructor or a good prof in your main discipline, if you don't sometimes complain about them,
Yeah.
if you don't sometimes
They're not
feel like they're
pushing you.
demanding things of you haven't really grasped yet, then you're probably not getting very good coaching or instruction.
Right.
Like that should happen. You should definitely have periods where you feel like, because don't we feel like that in all of life? Okay, Lord, what on earth are you doing? Right? I mean, I think that's a perfectly legitimate experience because, what are the Psalms full of?
Right. And the thing is, there's a coach.
Full of.
Yeah.
And
the
yet we
thing
don't
is,
want to
as a
just
coach,
frustrate people, right?
In a sport, a coach, that's way more akin to
Yeah.
living. Whereas a geometry or a mathematics teacher, can you do these proofs? Can you do these equations?
Sure.
That's way more, how you didn't teach him anything, you just told him to read, and yet you're blaming him because he can't read, not that he couldn't learn, then I would struggle with that.
But if
Right.
we're talking about reduction, the baseball coach had it right. It's never just about baseball,
Right.
right? That if you're doing one thing well, and I'm in some sense trying to talk this through in a way that doesn't, I don't know, I guess spoil things down the road. But the elephant in the room here.
No, it's
is that-
okay. We can jump.
Okay, all right. The elephant in the room is that we're talking about formative virtues, and one of the things that's cool about virtues is that they're transferable from skill to skill. If I develop, if a baseball coach is able to drive home fortitude or
Yeah.
prudence or something in baseball,
Yeah.
I get to take that thing with me to other things that are not baseball. And so in some sense, to have it broader than just the specific thing is avoiding the reduction that I think this question started with. And I'd like to think that can apply to anything. I mean, obviously as a theology teacher, I would hope that in the classroom I can drive home something that transcends the confines of the classroom, just like this baseball coach realized that what he has an opportunity to do insofar as he's a baseball coach is really transcend baseball. And I think that's how human beings behave. We're always sort of transcending the horizon of the specific thing we're doing when we do something, which is why the contractual model cannot work. It's not just bad, it is impracticable.
Well, a contractual reduction. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. So reductions, yeah.
Where the bottom level
Contract
is
only.
what did we
Yeah.
agree on? Because I think it's really key, because, I mean, surely we can't have cooperation if we don't have agreed upon terms, right?
Right.
Like, even so, interestingly, you mentioned transferability. I think I would actually say translatability.
Okay.
The reason is,
Okay.
I got fascinated with this way back years. I had students write research papers on this subject, and I started chasing it down because it was so fascinating. There's a whole body of school. It's a school of thought that's based on the idea that self-control is a moral muscle. And actually, I have a critique of it because I think they conflate fortitude and temperance, and that's part of why their results get skewed. But there's been a bunch of both social psychology and neuroscience research on this, and interestingly, it turns out that those, what we would call fortitude and temperance practices,
Yes.
the habits you build, they're not, if you pardon the analogy here, they're not fungible. Having them in one area doesn't mean you automatically have them in another, but they are translatable, because if you've practiced them here and you realize, I need to
Yes,
practice this
right.
here, you're more able to do it.
It requires
Because you have a
application.
template for doing it. But
Yes,
so you
right.
need that. And I think that goes to what we're saying, because
Yeah.
I think that when you're doing education, to some extent, you're going to have to make those translations explicit. That's part of what educators do, is we make the translations between one domain and another explicit for people. And that does mean we're going to have some level of agreed upon language, agreed upon benchmarks, which is why we actually still do grading, even though we all know, and this is the thing I thought it was interesting that we never really quite hit in the past couple minutes, is that the grade isn't the output of the education. If you're coming to me as a student saying, I did all the work and I didn't get a good grade, fundamentally you're misunderstanding the situation. The question isn't, did you get a good grade? The grade is just feedback on how you're doing on the explicit benchmarks. And the answer is, well, not very well yet.
Yeah.
But that doesn't tell me anything automatically about whether you're getting the education.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, for someone like me, part of the education was realizing that I was never going to be a top-notch performer in computer science, because I'm slower at math than most of the people who are really good at it. I mean, I like math, but I'm not as good at it as a lot of other people. I know a lot of people who, went out and got doctorates in mathematics. I can't do that. But that was part of my education, was learning precisely the map of my strengths and weaknesses. And yes, attempting some things I wasn't good at, right? But also realizing much better at some other things. The education isn't measured in the grade. The grade is the measure of your success in reaching certain benchmarks at a certain level. But just like you don't measure the humanity of a child by how soon they start reading, right? You don't measure your success in shaping a human by what grades they get. But if your son is coming home complaining about this frustrating teacher who he does all the work and he always seems to get lousy grades from, what is it you need to hear from that teacher? That teacher needs to be able to give evidence, not just a bunch of mystifying blather. He needs to be able to give you evidence that the education is happening, even if the grades don't seem to be the output. In other words, if you're not going to have your grades automatically stack up to reflect the only things you're demanding, and of course, that would be unrealistic. that would reduce education to the lowest common denominator, and that's what happens.
Is what Alan, I think, was getting to with
Yeah.
something when you use the word objective that's agreed upon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Concrete and communicable is what I would say. That's what we mean by realistically accessible. That's just what we mean by it, is when someone says, are you doing this thing you set out to do, or are you just frustrating my kid? You can say, well, here's what we set out to do,
Yes.
and here's how I can tell whether it's working, and here's what's working and what's not.
Yeah.
Realistically accessible. We have concrete, agreed upon language for knowing whether we're doing what we set out to do. Okay? So I do think it's important not to go, let's evade contract. Because realistically, you can only have organized, coordinated efforts if you have contracts. You have to have agreements that you keep. You have to keep your word. You have to do what you
Yes.
said.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to show you do what you did, provide things honest in the sight of all men, right? It has to be there. But if that becomes, the problem is always with any kind of thing, and even social scientists know this, whenever the metric becomes the target, it invalidates the metric, even in raw secular terms. If you say, well, what I want is to use grades to help give a sense of how my student is being formed in this education process, and then you say, so the goal now is to make sure all my students have good grades. Well, there's a very easy way to make students all have good grades. Just give them to them.
Yeah.
And of course, once anyone does that, the pressure on all of the rest of us to do it is frankly unbearable. I have literally had job crises that amounted to inflate the grades or find a different career. Literally. Just because the institutional environment wasn't mature enough to handle the situation where things went.
I wonder-
Anyway, that's a sidetrack. But go ahead.
Sam was about to say.
Gabe.
Well,
Sam.
I was going to say on the note of grades specifically, when since we're there, one of the most remarkable things about being in secondary education the last couple of years is the degree to which there's universal dissatisfaction with grades as such.
Yeah.
Everybody knows there's a problem. In my circumstance at my school, there's an attempt to rank students alongside their letter grade. We have to assign a number for all of these, what we might be garbled under education speak, but are fundamentally virtues. How good are they at overcoming obstacles and rising to get fortitude, right? There is a drive to at least supplement the grade with something else. So there's a deeper sense that whatever it is we're doing with these letters, it isn't the thing we're supposed to be doing. And that's an opportunity. I think that's an opportunity.
The trick with it is that's a perennial feature of
Really
American educational ethics. No. It's a cyclical feature, and you should always use the cycle to your advantage. But it's a cyclical feature.
Yeah.
It's a cyclical feature. In 2000, when I did a seminar in pedagogy methods for composition as a grad student, right, my first year of grad school, one of the major things we discussed was whether grading was a meaningful way to respond to writing at all. Right, ungraded writing was the hotness. But if you go way back, go all the way back, the whole history of modern American education, like past Dewey even, is the history of us realizing that this thing, when we try to mass produce this thing for everyone, you can easily replicate a few core features of it. And then beyond that, you go, oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff we're not hitting. And you go, well, now we've got to try to fill that in. And the problem is that the models we're using don't fill it in successfully. and so when we and unfortunately, I think this reduction we're talking about, when you take and you say, okay, so I've got all of this stuff, and this is the stuff I can do really easy on a kind of contractual, here's your education kit basis, right? And then you tack on to it, well, now we've got to fill in your social skill set, or your plays well with others set, like was on my elementary school grade report cards, and all this stuff. We got to fill in these things, or we need to have recreation, like was the big hotness in the 1920s, where we're going to educate for democracy. Okay, that all of that kind of thing comes as a alongside thing. We're going to talk about in a minute, I hope, about the kind of Evelyn Anscombe take on this. But I agree, though. I think it's there, and people sense it because we're supposed to.
Yeah.
Right? As Gabe was saying, we're built this way.
We're built this way.
When you try to educate us on this literally collapsed inward minimalist model, we get frustrated, and teachers get frustrated with it. Teachers get tired of spending all their energy managing classrooms for students who don't want to be there, and then occasionally getting a decent conversation out of them. It's fatiguing, and you can see it in what teachers get ground down to after enough years. And occasionally they rebel and they try to do something else, doggone it, and that usually ends their careers. But here, let's move on for a second, though. I wanted to, because it's very easy to pick the nits. I specifically put a note here on this question about reductive understandings and the dangers of education efforts that are shaped on them, I just said, don't forget to include examples from our side. Okay? In other words, what among our ideas are our natural allies' ideas are similar reductions? And I'm going to just segue right on to the next kind of question I had, because it's much of the same. What are some examples of well-meaning efforts to assess whether a human process has achieved the growth of faith, hope, and charity in the soul?
Repeat the question, would you?
Okay. So just with a general view to saying reduction happens on our side too, so to speak.
Yeah.
What are some examples of well-meaning efforts, and implicitly I'm suggesting they're misguided. What are some examples of well-meaning efforts to assess whether a human process has achieved the growth of faith, hope, and charity in the soul?
Well, for one thing, I haven't figured out who my side is yet, but besides that,
I feel like vaguely we have a sense, though, of
yeah.
who's trying to be my ally and who's not.
sure, I don't know.
Oh, I understand.
That's a different conversation for a different.
There are a bunch of Marxists that I claim are on my side, even though I'm really hostile to Marxism. So I get it.
Yeah.
The sides mix and match a bit.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking is the most obvious thing that comes to mind is the way that, let's just jump out and say it, in conservative Christian education circles, a singular activity or a singular human faculty is maximalized, and it's just sort of magically assumed that if you engage in this thing, it's happening.
That, and that's incredible.
How concrete can you make that? Help me picture that more exactly.
Okay.
You guys are pointing at each other. I
still
love
have
this.
my
But
examples,
somebody
so
jump
you
in
can
and
go
go.
ahead.
Okay, well, I think an example of that is, I remember, and I believe Dr. Epps, you were there too, where Professor Nieto, I think his name was.
Yeah. Nito. I like pronouncing it that way.
Nito.
It's Nito.
Professor Nito said, the fundamental problem with the what he called the great books model. He's a professor at St. John's College, University, whatever it is in Annapolis. Is
He's at St. John's.
St. John's.
I was confusing him with
Maybe he was Thomas Aquinas.
I was confusing with Cuddeback, who's at Christendom. But
Well,
yeah.
either way,
Sorry.
same model.
Tony
Nito,
very interesting. Prof.
Really great guy,
Really
but he
challenging
said
figure.
the almost insurmountable challenge with that education model is breaking students of the idea that if we just read this amount of books, this corpus,
Yes.
we will have all the tools we need in life.
Right.
It's just it's back to the checking the box. It's the same thing. It's like if you read the Iliad and then you read all the way through Thomas Hardy, then you are suddenly the cultured, educated person who can refute the atheists.
Yes. Exactly.
Thomas Hardy?
Well, I picked 20th century. I don't know. I went there.
Well,
If you read that much Thomas Hardy on top of the Iliad, you're going to be deeply depressed. Go ahead.
We'll throw in some levity in there. as well,
so
too.
Sam's example is kind of the same direction I was going.
That's
I mean,
right, yeah,
good.
sure.
In terms of isolating an activity, right? Great books, or another one that, again, apropos of this book in its larger form, is seminar.
Mm-hmm.
If we just have them do seminar, they will become flourishing human beings.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all
All
our
seminars but this one are seriously overrated.
Well, no, I mean, I have been acquainted with
No, you're right, though.
with things where that's literally the only pedagogical method that's seen as worthwhile. And
I've
and
interviewed schools that insist it's the only one they will use.
the problem is that it's so pernicious it causes you to rewrite history, and all of a sudden you see Jesus talking to the Pharisees as sort of the height, breadth, length, and depth of the educational model. It's like, dude, Jesus talking to the Pharisees is a ridiculous conversation. Like, this is not the paradigm for education, partially because he's talking to the freaking Pharisees. So this is weird.
Actually, I'm trying really hard not to sidetrack too far on this.
But as far as
It is
isolating
an example of rabbinical discourse, which actually is an interesting education model.
sure, But
it's a very in-group model.
Right, yeah.
He's talking his own language to his nearest neighbors.
Right, but it's very
With them.
anachronistic to then take that specific
Right.
thing out of its cultural context and say, this is what Socrates did, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, slow down.
Yeah.
And then, in terms of isolating a faculty, I think the one that's kind of in the back of my mind always is the imagination.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
If you incite the imagination to wonder, boom. Doesn't matter what did it or what you're calling wonder or what you're calling the imagination. We can feel good about ourselves. We're doing Christian education.
Yeah. Or token, one or the other.
Well, there's isolating an author. I mean, this is
No. I'm sorry. If you excite the imagination to wonder, Tolkien.
Oh, I thought you said Tolkien.
Yeah.
I mean, you were talking about Tolkien's first, cultural emergence.
Right. Yeah. He was very popular.
He was
with
in
the,
Zeppelin songs before
hashish set
he
in the
was
60s.
in Catholic school curriculums, I have to imagine.
Yeah.
So.
Although he would not have been happy about that.
Probably not.
But oh gosh, he didn't mind the book sales though.
But Sam was also about to say something. I think we were pointing again.
No, this was.
No, that was really it, just in terms of our side.
Yeah.
The nearest closest allies, as you said.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. We all know school systems approaches that choose one of these things and make it the stand-in for the hoped for result, right? If you read a long enough list of all of the right books, that should be like it's programmatic input, right? That's the code. And once we fed this code into your head, it's going to make you better, right? It's a phenomenon one of my first grad school profs goes to call the Bach-Auschwitz problem, right? Yeah. The fact that the Germans at Auschwitz really loved their Bach, that they would play Bach in the camps. It turns out that the effects, the humanizing effects of humane education are not automatic.
No.
They're not, they don't just happen by contagion, right? And so just reading all the right books, and even assuming you figure out which are all the right books, it doesn't automatically. And the same thing with seminars. Just because we choose to engage in a mimicry of Platonic dialectic, which even his student Aristotle didn't think was the primary mode of instruction, or even actually the mode of instruction at all.
As cool as it is.
Doesn't mean, he thought it was cool. He thought it was a totally different thing. He said you engage in dialectic of that sort, discursive dialectic, when you're dealing with a matter where nobody really knows the answer. Why are you doing? Because you're effectively, Aristotle thinks of it as brainstorming. It's not a productive exercise. It doesn't give you the information. It just says we don't really know, so what we need to do is hammer away at the ideas until we come up with something we can pull on.
Yeah.
And I get that. That makes sense. But what that means is that where should you be doing dialectic of that kind? Well, not in elementary school.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Because the last thing you want a bunch of young kids to do is go, I thought I knew what a tree was, but whoa, man.
Well, and ironically, maybe a guy I'm always afraid to bring up, but ironically enough, even John Sr. himself understood this. I mean, he has a whole chapter in Restoration of Christian Culture, which has its problems.
It does.
About, sort of the teacher as prophet, and his sort of bewailing the fact that so many teachers are afraid to sort of take the leadership role in the class and just unveil reality to their students, which in theory a good teacher should want to do.
Yeah.
I get worried when I hear people delighting in the game of hot potato they can play with people.
Yeah.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah.
There are teachers I've met who seem to get I would say, disordered amount of delight in causing people to want to run up their tree, and the stick is always one step in front of them, especially when it's young people. And to me, there's obviously a value in thinking things through and not just giving people answers. But when it comes across that your sort of identity in the classroom is the carrot on the stick holder, and you get a lot of fun out of just watching them try to grab it and fall on their face, I start to kind of worry about your mental health.
Would I be wrong in calling that little man syndrome?
No, I don't think you are.
Yeah.
I think you're sensing just the right thing. This is the guy who delights in writing a test where there's a hidden instruction in a paragraph at the last page of the test that invalidates the instructions you gave on the first page, and if you were really reading carefully, you wouldn't have fallen for that.
But my
Right?
point is that the seminar.
That we have.
people
I'm
do
going
this
to try not to use this as a recording, but we have less polite words that are the aptest description of such people, right? Because that's really is what you should say about that person. It's not just he's a bad teacher. It's he's, let's be
Bad
nice,
person.
a jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's playing a kind of intellectual sadism, and that's not.
And my fear is
And
that in
there's-
the Christian circles, seminar becomes that.
There's a kind of a benign version of that too. Meaning it's not quite so evilly, narcissistically malignant and self-serving as that, but it's just an idea that let's go back to your imagination and wonder thing, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's this misbegotten romanticism that says that because the things of God are bigger than the material things I can see, they include more, that means that they are necessarily both higher, and because they're incomprehensible, well, that means they're also outside rationality, which, let's face it, if revelation is outside rationality, then revelation fails to be revelation. Revelation is precisely what God has conveyed to rationality of himself. That is precisely what it is.
Well, as long as you clarify that rationality is not an adequate receptacle. That it has to be made.
Rationality is adequate to revelation. It's just that the revelation is only part of what's there. God has not revealed all of himself. It's like, you remember, there's the classic phrase in Deuteronomy, the secret things of God are his, but the things revealed are yours to all generations. The whole point of revelation is to say that some things about God are communicable, you can grasp them. Having said that, those are not all of the things of God.
Right, okay.
God is a lot of other things.
Yes, okay.
And we will never connect all of the ends of revelation up into the perfect bow. We just can't get our arms around it. But having said that, the things that are revealed because we are the kind of beings that can actually take them in.
Right, okay, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Remember, I don't use rationality to mean a kind of syllogistic reduction. Rationality means the ability to grasp things in their natural proportions.
Yeah, that's just that's more of a sort of
Ratio.
theological.
Yeah,
understanding,
ratio,
right?
not Cartesian cogito.
Yeah.
Ratio.
Right. Yeah.
Ratio, grasp the proportions.
That was a knee-jerk reaction that I
No, you're right.
unfortunately have.
No, that's fine. It's a reasonable one. Yeah.
Reasons.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's quite reasonable. There's a perennial problem of being, how can I say, cheeseball Neotomists, where we're actually being modern post-Cartesian rationalists, but we think that we're being Thomistic on the one hand, or being God in the gaps mystifiers on the other hand.
That would be the reasons I was.
Yes, absolutely.
Politely.
I'm just more allergic to one side than the other, and you're going the other way, and that's fine. That's what dialectic is for.
Yeah.
But but what? Where was I reaching there? I think the benign version of what you're talking about, this kind of malignant, sadistic spider who's just trying to confuse his students and then claim victory, right? Is the person who really does think that in order to get at God, you have to be constantly getting at moments that are like, whoa, I don't even get it, man. In other words, it's stoner philosophy done as theology. And I'm not even being satirical.
Absolutely.
Everyone who's engaged in dorm room bowl sessions about philosophy or theology knows there's a point at which you're all just sitting around, essentially doing the same thing as those potheads down the hall who are going, whoa, they call them fingers, but I never see them thing. Little Simpsons version for you. But that's the thing that we're doing there. And I think a lot of well-meaning educators mystify because they think that's how you get at the mystery of God. Well, mystery is only meaningful when it's right at the very edge. You push the reasoning as far as you can, and you have to go, it turns out I can't get all of it. Right? If you haven't pushed the reasoning as far as you can, then it's just mystification. You're just going, whoa, I feel confused. That must mean it's profound.
Yeah.
So can I, because this just came to me,
Yo.
and I want to see
That was
if
my
it's
formal
akin,
English expression.
Yeah.
it's akin to this. it's not exactly the same.
Mhm.
But I've heard these discussions about the struggle with religious education being bound up in Steubenville experiences.
Mm.
And so where we take the kids to Springfield and they have this great
Yeah.
spiritual movement, and then they come home to Mass and they're bored. And so we struggle with, we want them to have those emotional giant responses at some point, but at the same time, we don't want them to be bored with the liturgy. And so is that this, they're sitting in their dorm rooms going, aha, wow,
It's,
you know.
it's what we used to call in where I grew up. I should say this emphatically because y'all who grew up Catholic didn't probably have the same conversation as I did growing up. But it's what we used to call the summer camp decision problem.
Yeah, okay.
You go off, in where I grew up, you went off to summer camp, and you were in this hothouse environment where you had all these big games that just wore you out, and you played hard with all your friends, and you had all these, you had 2 or 3 sermons a day, and they all ended with some kind of massive call to make a decision right now,
Yeah.
right? And you came home very, very, very firmly convinced that the God who was at summer camp was really, really, really making a total demand on your life at summer camp. And sometimes that didn't translate 2 days when you got home. Now that's the caricature, that's the cartoon version, because I think that everyone can think of examples of your own life or people you've known where that's not how that went at all. It really did make a profound difference. And so I think there's a weird trade-off there. Sam, I saw you kind of looking, no? Okay. Does it make sense? I mean, I think.
Yeah, and I'm trying to equate
Yeah.
it to your conversation
Yeah.
about the dorm room
Yeah.
guys smoking dope.
Yeah.
and
Well,
having
it
a
is- it
moment.
is
Well, we
related.
do have that thing, yeah.
It is
Yeah.
related. It's actually a pretty concrete example of where we started this conversation in terms of what do people on our side do.
Yeah.
If we can effect these controllable things in a student in a hothouse environment, back to the St. John's example, then they will have everything that they want. It's fundamentally the same problem. At St. John's, if I just read the same amount of book, finite number of books, this canon, and okay, if we can isolate a kid for a week at camp and have this experience, because the kid at St. John's and the kid coming home from summer camp, and the kid graduating from St. John's, they're entering the same world with the same problem, which is, or Steubenville or wherever, you
How do I
leave
apply this?
how many older people do we know had a robust faith life in college, and then they leave college and they don't know what to do with that energy? How do I replicate that community I was a part of? And it causes real harm to people, and it causes real tragedy and trauma to people.
So do you think that the church, in her wisdom, sees to this by making, at least for me, my liturgical faith life is so day in and day out, repeat the same task,
Yes.
methodical. In her wisdom, she's like, do
I think
this
that the
every
sacramental
time.
economy and the everydayness of liturgical
That's awesome.
embodiment of that
Yeah,
is
that's awesome.
absolutely given to
Well,
this.
and one of the things that's kind of the elephant in the room here is that the middle between the sort of the mundane and the Steubenville experience is the organization of time that the festal calendar used to offer that we've lost. So in some sense, what we're shooting for is something in between, where we have a built-in rhythm of peaks and valleys within our year, where we are having a bit more of an emotional experience. If you have a church where you have good liturgy, 6 to 12 times a year, you are having them pull out all the stops in a way that's going to cause an experience that you may or may not have at daily mass. And in a world where that's just become totally flattened, and you are either left with 2 options, either sort of consign yourself to a mundane spirituality or go experience hunting.
Yes.
In some sense, that's a false dichotomy. And neither one of those options are what the church should be trying to sort of elevate above the
Right.
other.
Exactly.
Well said.
Neither of those is the thing.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Well, so I guess
I
I
like
want to double back on this though, because I think that one of you guys where you started with this kind of contractual, we agree on a thing and we're going to get a result, and then we end up not being sure whether we are using the right measure for the result, right? I want to go back. So the question I was trying to pose is, what are some examples of well-meaning efforts to actually judge the result of whether you're
Service
getting
hours.
faith, hope, and charity out of a human process?
Service hours.
Okay.
In theory, you identified a certain amount, which seems to indicate that they've done enough of it to have some sort of transformation. And you're saying, okay, we know students are going out into the world with a Christian compass because they completed however many acts of service measured however many hours.
Right.
I think that's the example. I think all four of us here are more ready to,
Yeah.
that's not right. It's not good.
No,
Really bad.
I quite like the idea of required service hours, but I think if you think that by them you are evaluating the growth of faith, hope, and charity in the soul, you have a severely misguided
I would
understanding
argue
of
the
faith.
way it's done commonly doesn't evaluate anything, because they can't even evaluate the quality of the service hour.
Mm-hmm.
At the institution that I work at, a number of the service hours that are done don't require the person doing them to even interface with the person they're helping. A lot of the activities are things that are sort of off-sourced to third parties, like basically like recyclable materials that you can sit at home and TV and do, or have your brothers do, and then you can do that for well above the required and get yourself an award, a service award for just how loving and caring you are.
Okay. Yeah. I think especially those secondary incentive systems that are, how can I say, they're just misdirected. I agree. I think those are
No, I'm a big fan
really
of
weird and problematic.
Well, and as an accountant, I totally get why Katie Gordy used to do that for all the RE students at St. Monica, and people would rail against it, and I'm like, well, how would she know?
Yeah.
That you're even trying outside of being at class. I mean, I have responded to requests from McGinnis students when they volunteer at the festival.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And so this year, when it happens again, I'm going to say, okay, now, you know why you were here, and try to build upon.
Yeah.
You're doing these things not just so you can get a tally of hours. You're doing these because you're trying to be a Christian.
Well, I think that's the crucial value add that makes it a formation process.
Yeah.
And I think that often you do have things where you're like, look, this exercise, if done right, will be valuable to you. And so what I need to do is have a minimum gatekeeping function. Did you even try it? Did you even show up?
Yeah.
Because just showing up is an actual part of this of that.
Of course.
So I would agree. But you're right. I know that these things get used as proxies for all these other things. They get used as, our students really are highly socially engaged, and they understand that they're bringing the faith to the world because, they process some recyclables in front of their TV.
And does that go back to what we were just talking about? Is you get them to come to Mass on a regular basis, even on the days that they don't want to be there. They don't have ears to hear, and so, or the husband goes home every night, is faithful to his wife every night, even though there's nights that he's mad at her, et cetera, et cetera. So you have this kind of, or their kids are there, he's there to help with the kid. I mean, is this mundane, you call it the methodical day in, day out, sun comes up, sun goes down?
That's the concern I'm driving toward. I think you were getting at with the examples of big conferences and big experiences. I mean, there's a genuine value in experiencing solidarity in the faith with lots of other people. Just knowing you're not alone in it, that people all over the world actually have that same faith, that's a tremendously valuable natural strengthening process. Yeah. But notice that I did not use the word have an emotional high. You will. I mean, that will be an emotionally affirming experience. But if you start using your emotional response to things, this is the other thing, I think, in addition to really material and mundane things, we also have this other thing where we go, do you have a lot of emotional intensity on display? Are you performing? Are you performing on fire for God? If you're playing the role of on fire for God really well, then we think faith, hope, and charity are growing in your soul. Well, as a lifelong product of very, very evangelical Christian institutions, I can tell you that on fire for God is a performance you can do really well once you've learned it. It's like the old saying, right? If you can, the most valuable thing is sincerity. If you can learn to fake that, you've got it made. If you can learn to do like Jesus flavored everything all the time, yeah, you can make it. I mean, shucks, yeah, just go start a traveling roadshow as an evangelist, right?
But other examples from our side that maybe are not extracurricular, so to say, are, well, take for a religious institution. No matter where you are in education, we don't just have one theology class, but students in our institution are always in a theology class, and that is somehow the thing that is going to imbue them, instantiate them in the faith. And from the institutional perspective, is the institution well-meaning, once again, checking the box of, we're doing the faith thing with these students. And so stands as, in my experience, the largest example of well-meaning people on our side in this conversation with us, trying to and ultimately not being successful in inculcating faith, hope, and charity in students.
Which beautifully transfers to my very next question. What are then, granted that we're probably misguided if we try to jump to saying, this is the thing that I can tell you have faith, hope, and charity growing in your soul, and we're doing a great job making a little Christian out of you. If with that kind of misbegotten cheerleading that is often well-meaning but really stems from a failure to understand how people grow and what the faith is. What are, though, natural precursors to faith, hope, and charity that we can teach in ways that can be realistically assessed for effectiveness? So we realistically assess, we're just talking about when someone says, I did all the things, but I don't think I got the result. Can you say, no, you're getting the result. Here's what you did, here's how you evaluated it, and here is, yeah, that's what we were trying to do. You're getting the result. It just might not look like you want. Like, can I realistically assess it? Are there natural precursors to faith, hope, and charity that I can actually assess? That I can actually organize an education effort around? I mean, I'll kick off. One example would be, do you show up to do the service work like you're supposed to, right? Do you show up? That is a natural precursor.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, am I actually putting on the curriculum, taking time to teach you the content of your faith? That's a natural precursor to faith. You need to know the stuff if you're going to believe it.
Yeah, I mean, insofar as grace not only perfects nature but also presupposes it, anytime that you're operating with a correct model of what the human person is, and you're trying to bring out those potentials, you are, even if those efforts aren't inherently religious, I would argue, you are basically doing the work of a gardener so that the Holy Spirit can infuse life into that person. Now, we might get more specific at what these things look like habitually and call them formative virtues, but
We just might, weirdly enough.
Who knew we were going there?
Isn't that the? I think that I
Yes.
got from the point of the chapter.
This question is basically tell me my whole game.
But
The point of the chapter is to bring that into everything that we teach.
Precisely.
but this is Alan's baseball coach. I mean,
That's
yeah,
exactly.
this
That's what I'm saying. Is the,
yeah.
the point. The point is that when we realistically assess what we're doing, yes, we think in terms of what we're doing if it's working is inculcating these formative virtues in each of these separate domains to whatever way we can see them, whatever we can draw them out. We're doing that in every one of these domains. That's what that's all about. It's all about what kind of person do you need to be a good Christian studying biology, right? What kind of person do you need to be a flourishing human being playing baseball, right?
Yeah, and go for it.
I apologize. I have to go.
Okay.
Good.
He's been in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. And he's ready to go home.
Good.
So,
We
Get it.
We're gonna wrap up here.
all right. Sorry
I've
about
got
the mess.
about noon, that's just when I need to be heading back as well. So.
It's fine. It's fine. I understand. I wrote enough questions to keep us busy for about 5 hours. So.
Okay.
Because that's what you do. Because you never know when's just gonna go flat.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'd like to
I
say.
feel smarter. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, Al.
Yeah.
I appreciate your contributions. I think they were valuable.
See you, Alan.
On the on this note of formative virtues, things that undergird our capacity for receiving faith over charity. Take fortitude. And an example that I have found resonates with students and certainly other teachers is for my students, for their senior thesis, has to be on a theological topic that they've encountered sometime in their education. I make it clear to them that the best of your theses will be, in some sense, an act of courage. Like, it will take courage because it will be skin in the game somehow. You will be putting yourself on the line to make an argument that you could be wrong about, that you could get criticism
Right.
for.
Yeah.
And so you need to understand this is not just an quote unquote academic exercise. This is an act of actual real life courage that you need to take.
Yeah.
And so we
taking
talk
criticism is a matter of endurance.
Exactly.
You have to hold up under that sting long enough to hear what's being said.
And we all know in this room that hurts. It can hurt.
Oh,
it can hurt
It can be
worse than
miserable.
any other kind, like as much as any other kind of pain.
Yeah.
It's painful. Can be painful. And so we talk about how do we build into our education these formative virtues. I think part of it is just be explicit about it.
Right.
Be clear that these things we are doing are not isolated to the classroom. That just because it's in the classroom, there's no dichotomy between it's a classroom exercise versus real life. No, the classroom is real life.
Right, and to go back to our our beginning example of the student who at least thinks he's done what he needs to do to get his grade, is upset. In some sense, that presupposes an unwillingness to acknowledge that his actual life is on the line in things that let's say that sounds violent. That there is no separate.
I mean, some days that's what it's going to be.
Your classroom activities aren't a sort of collection of simulated activities that don't actually touch the core of who you are, and if you do poorly on them, in some sense, are a reflection of who you really are. And I think oftentimes the students are actually just unwilling to acknowledge that what they produce in the classroom actually extends from the very depths of who they are as a person. And so they either purposely put up a barrier, and,
Yes.
or if they do, are unwilling to face the reality when that's what actually occurs.
Yeah.
And either way you slice it,
I mean,
they're
I think
both
there's
making
a legitimate economy of engagement in the classroom. You only have so much time to understand and be understood by people in that situation. One of the challenges of that manipulative Ellen Smallman syndrome person is the kind of insistence that you must be naked and exposed to me in your interior life throughout our right. And so I would say that there is a legitimate place for a kind of some distancing, but you're right. I think when it's distancing from yourself and within yourself, when you're learning how to put up even to yourself a false front about what you really are, then something's going very wrong with your education.
I think the biggest problem with the student developments aren't so much that it's the spiritual voyeurism that happens in a small group culture.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you the people that will have lifelong trauma from feeling coerced by, maybe some of them were young, well-meaning college aged, among the high school aged, to just sort of let it all out there.
Yep.
We were all together and massed together and could feel the Holy Spirit. What He's wanting you to do is open yourself up, and that might
Can feel the Holy Spirit is frequently a very, very bad start to an instruction.
Dangerous place to
sure. So absolutely, I think there is an amount that I'm not saying that I think students should feel the need to lay themselves bare in everything they do. But if you are working on a major writing assignment and you're taking a stance on something, there is a through line from that stance.
That's right.
To yourself.
That's right. It has to actually be yours.
Yes.
You have to own it. And that's getting students to take ownership of their writing is even in secular writing instructions, one of the basic things you have to do, or you fail in writing. If it's not your writing,
Right.
that you are, if you are not personally responsible for the words, even if the words are expressing, if I write a paper trying to clearly express your viewpoint, I own those words. Those words need to be an honest reflection of your viewpoint.
This is
Right?
this is a huge problem in
Yeah.
theology because
Yeah.
Say what you mean, so you mean what you say.
they don't know how to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what they do is they just mime what they hear on Sundays, which is usually not very good, unfortunately.
Well,
So let's
Their
let's jump ahead then to, because I do want to get you guys thought on some of these, because I think this is what you guys came already ready to talk about. Let's jump ahead to the middle.
Okay.
Where we get to this section, we do have this line from Anscombe. I'll just go ahead and read the block quote from Anscombe. It is because morally wrong is the heir to this concept, the concept of the practical, of what you choose based on what is reasonable and right. It is because morally is the heir, but an heir that is cut off from the family of concepts from which it sprang, that morally wrong both goes beyond the mere factual description unjust, and seems to have no discernible content except a certain compelling force, which I should call purely psychological. So my question surrounding that is, how can we shape educational efforts so that we see just and unjust regarded as matters of fact that set the boundaries of reasonable responses, rather than as expressions of sentiment that go on larger pro-con lists?
I mean, this is.
And how can we assess whether we're actually doing that?
I think JP2 was right to assume Kant's language on autonomy and heteronomy and veritatis splendor, and then juxtapose heteronomy to what he calls participated theonomy. So an internalization of God's righteousness such that...
Break that out for me, because I usually get a rash whenever we say assume Kant's language.
Well, he does, though. I mean...
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
That's his education.
Okay.
No, I quite understand what he's doing.
Well, I know you understand this, so I guess what actually...
But I
what
don't
do you-
think I don't think of it in those words. The way you just put it is not how I would have phrased any particular thought I have about it. I'm aware that he uses his language,
yeah.
and I've read through it, but
Right. So JP2 in veritatis splendor seems to make the distinction between what Kant calls heteronomy, which is roughly something like external compliance to a righteousness that is not your own,
Right.
a righteousness that you bump up against, that constrains you,
Right.
that you have to make curb your desires to comply with, versus a righteousness that, in some sense, through grace, stems from it's an internal motion where what you desire is what God desires.
I mean, the problem for Kant, of course, is that Kant only has a God who's a regulative concept, that is to say, within you. So Kant's argument is that autonomy needs to trump heteronomy.
Right.
Which is where we get, people out there saying I should be able to kill my baby because it's my body.
But within quote unquote our side, that is usually kind of bracketed out, even if.
But it's not. That's why our side makes such crap arguments about those issues. But you're right, though. No. Just
okay.
follow your thought through.
All right.
Because
Yeah.
what JP2 does is he borrows that language and then he breaks the bifurcation.
Right.
Because what is it? What was your term?
Participated theonomy?
Which is very different from autonomy.
Yes.
It's exceedingly different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What does it mean to participate?
But it means to be drawn up into something that is not your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually, and metaphysically speaking, it means to always already have been
Yeah. Okay.
that,
yeah.
right?
Okay. Yes.
So you are in the sense that you are a creature. You participate in being.
Right. Yes.
You are one of the things that does this being thing.
Yeah.
One of your characteristic acts is to exist. You actually do exist. You exist in fact in the world of things that exists. And voluntary participation, because theonomy, if God has a law, well, a law requires a reason that can respond to it.
Yes.
And so our reasonable response is to respond to that law by becoming voluntary participants in what God is in redemption, where we were already automatically creaturely participants in being.
So
we become voluntary participants in the work
what
of
I
God.
was seeing, and maybe didn't phrase well when I was sort of giving a precedence to heteronomy, was the way that we often treat children or sort of ask children to behave from a very young age, and really doesn't stop, is to sacrifice what they want for this external thing that's required of them.
rather than
you're gonna want to go to college and have a good time and go to parties and get drunk and sleep around. Well, what God wants from you.
And ironically, I would argue this is the fundamental problem of Kant's influence on our ethics, because what Kant does is he says, yeah, let's get rid of external laws because we're enlightened now. We've thrown off the tutelage of believing in God, right? He writes this from his first sentence of his essay, "What is Enlightenment?" But what Kant does is he argues that you need to have this authentic internal guidance system that is the real moral law.
Right.
But then, of course, that real moral law has to be a second-order calculation about universal humanity.
Right, yeah.
It has to be that because otherwise it has no force of law. Otherwise it would just be whatever I want is my law, which is, of course, the reduction of it on one side. But
Right.
then the
So
problem
that happens
is we're
still.
all romantics. The problem is we're all Kantians.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, we have people who say, oh yeah, I should only do what I genuinely think is awesome, right? And that's one kind of Kantian. That's the autonomy Kantian who didn't listen to his writing about the categorical imperative. And then you have the Methodist Kantian, the ethical Kantian, who believes what I really have to do is have an extraordinarily astringent personal code based on my highest possible ideals about what's good for all of humanity. And that's how you become a prohibitionist. That's how you become part of the temperance movement. Is whatever the highest ideals of my highly feminized universal idealism is, that is what I must impose on everybody because I must first impose it on myself. It's just astringent altruism is the one. It's astringent altruism on the one hand,
Right.
or radical hedonism on the other,
Yeah.
and they're both Kant.
So the
which
way
is why JP2 chose to find it on
Right,
that
right.
ground.
And the way that we
He's not wrong.
in my ethics class, the analogy
Yeah.
I use to break this apart is you are a construction worker for an architect,
Mhm.
and you're realizing the blueprints for a house.
Mhm.
And this, this might be a chance for me to learn that this analogy isn't so great. We'll see. But the sort of oversimplified version that we give high schoolers that unfortunately cannot read Kant, I can barely read him, is
Everyone can barely read him. Most people don't even do it.
On the one hand you've got autonomy, which would be something akin to you plan to determine the blueprint for yourself, no matter the fact that this job has been given you and you have no right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to just do the opposite, where you merely comply with something that is not your vision for how this house should be. What if by you getting to know the architect, so to speak, and you learning from him why the blueprint is the way it is, you then see and desire, oh, that is how we want to build a house. And then you voluntarily opt in on his project, not in terms of, I just have to do this so I can, get paid, but, oh, I know the architect, he's giving me his spin on this blueprint. This is how we should build a house. And then you go do it. That's something akin to what JP2 means by participated theonomy.
Yeah, I'll take that one step less personalist. Okay.
Okay.
I start as a personalist, so
Okay.
I'm not. I think we can back that one step more traditional, one step farther back toward the Aristotelian mean of the tradition, and that is my architect. Unless I'm assuming that the architect actually is God, my architect himself is fallible. What is even less fallible than the architect's vision, as spelled out in the blueprint, or his vision as idealized and then possibly fallibly realized in the blueprint, is the laws of physics, right? In other words, what just is, okay, which is to say what the creator actually has done, okay, is less fallible than idealizations of it.
Right.
Okay? Than any human idealizations of it. And so even more important than having a relationship with the architect and feeling very invested in the work, it would be important for the builder to know whether it makes sense to put those joists where they are.
Well, and
He needs to know not just what the architect wants, but whether what the architect is doing makes sense.
And
And to do that, he has to know the reality underlying. And I would argue that the beauty of talking about God is that we're not choosing between these things.
in
we're
the
doing
analogy,
them both at
God
once.
is the architect, by the way. That's we do.
But
We do
no,
make
but
that.
what's saying is let's break the analogy and then reassemble it.
Okay,
In this case, you're dealing with not just an architect,
right.
but also the one who makes the laws of physics.
Yes.
So that even more fundamentally than the revelation of his purposes, which is in fact perfect,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
is the fact that that revelation perfectly corresponds
Right.
to what just is. And I think that's the trick. The trick is that we have a habit, and we inherit it from several generations of rationalist, empiricist, idealist, even what you might call realist in the modern sense, is actually idealist empiricism. Scientific realism
Okay. Yeah.
only functions in a post-idealist world. You could redescribe it completely in terms of metaphysical realism. Sorry.
Yeah.
And it works very differently. I've just been writing that chapter on Taylor, so I'm way deep in these weeds at the moment. But the point being that as of Kant, our whole sense of subjective objective had been altered. Okay, as of that moment, that was all changing, and it really radically changes after Kant. And so we have this automatic habit of bifurcating the relational meaning, the ideal meaning, the ideas of things,
Yeah.
from what just is. Because Kant told us those things can never be in the same place at the same time.
The schism between the phenomenon
Kant
and
told
the
us that
ideal.
can't happen,
Yeah, right.
and we believed him because he wrote like 3 books about it. And they're so dense no one can read them, so no one criticizes them. I mean,
no
seriously,
problem.
if you've ever tried to read the Critique of Practical
I have.
Reason, right?
Yeah,
It's
no,
murder. It's murder. Critique of Pure Reason is worse.
So the initial question, though.
Critique of Judgment, by the way, is fascinating.
We're running a little bit
Yeah,
long.
sorry.
And well, no, sorry.
But practically back to, how do we
But-
get
but
just and
I-
unjust
I think that's the
in the
harder
realm of
question.
fact?
It's a harder question than
In the realm
critiquing
of
Kant.
how do we do it?
How do we objectively
How do we
measure?
do it? Well, I think we have to understand the task to know whether we're doing it, but
Yeah, I agree.
But yes, what is...
I'm going to start
The
just
how.
at the most basic level, which is use the language, use the terms, the 4 cardinal. This is an act of moral courage to do that. You name it for the students.
Yes.
You blueprint. I think that is the first step.
I
Beyond that,
really strongly agree.
I frankly don't know beyond that what are programmatic steps, but I do know that is the absolute beginning.
And I think I really emphatically agree because, sorry, I'm getting
Please,
caught. I'm getting caught up
please.
in talking now.
Okay,
I'm gonna
there's
try to
just-
back out
There's
again.
only 3 of us, so
But
that would make.
I really emphatically agree because one of the things that I find it so hard to get us to do is to stop paraphrasing ourselves
Yes.
in other people's language.
Yes.
And this is the thing that Anscombe, I think, objects to, is this idea that we use this, almost psychotic, this internal schism to try to speak 2 languages at once.
Yes.
And it's fine to translate once you've said what you have to say. But if you translate before you've said it, then what were you saying again? You'll lose track of yourself. And that's the challenge is to speak in terms of the facts of what is, right? I'm not sure that this blueprint reflects accurately what I wish the joist placement was, because I think I learned something about how physics works. And I don't know whether nails can be put that way. The joists are not strong enough to bear that load. You need more.
Here's an example for in terms
Yeah.
of the virtues, and back to my seniors writing their papers, their capstone papers at the end of their education. Say you have a precocious student who wants to write a paper that's way too ambitious. Maybe making an argument that is courageous in a sense, but it lacks prudence, or maybe it lacks temperance in its scope and ambition. Name it as that as you're critiquing the student. Use the language every step of the way.
This is a task for a book that you're going to need to write in 40
And
years.
so it is not.
This is
prudent.
not something you can do right now.
It is not prudent.
Yeah.
This is not a prudent move to try to demonstrate this argument over 8 pages in a 9-week period.
Yeah.
So you just always use the language of the virtues, of the formative virtues, in how you speak to students, how you relate to them, and how you communicate to them your expectations of.
So, and I'm going to have a Gen Z moment here. I think it's really important. I've found this. This is one of the
Are we
things.
vibing? No, okay.
No. So, well, like, one of my biggest frustrations with conservative Christian culture is the knee-jerk reactions to the media that the kids are into. You know, whether it's the music or the movies, the TV shows. I think there's a huge missed opportunity for when your 15-year-old boy, I know we're on the record, but you'll edit this out, starts quoting the super hot Margot Robbie moments in Wolf of Wall Street chapter and verse. You can respond one of 2 ways. You can do the kind of classic thing where you go, ew, gross, you're being disrespectful, shut down the conversation. Or you can start analyzing that movie in terms of the virtues.
And to be honest, I think there are moments for both. Like I think sometimes people need to see your visceral reaction, because that's the example they need. Who back a second?
Okay.
Yeah, I
like
was trying
was that
to
a
wave
bridge?
Evelyn in, but I think she's concerned that James is.
Yeah.
So the kiddo's running rampant in the library.
Right. Well, and sometimes, oftentimes I'll first correct the language. I'm like, the way you described this woman was not respectful, but oftentimes what they're really actually after is they're attracted to the Jordan Belfort character and what he's able to enjoy.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I think there's a time and a place for that's just not appropriate, and there's a time and a place for redirecting it into what you hope is really an issue, especially if you're confident it is. I think that's a judgment you have to make based on the relationship you have and the situation you're in.
Right.
And I genuinely think that part of helping people grasp this idea that this stuff just is real is in fact the fact that in fact people have this reaction. I mean, I do think that decency is a real thing. Just like affability is a real thing, right?
Yeah.
One strives to show general friendliness because it's a part of justice. Similarly with decency, one strives to be, it's a variation of what the medievals would have called modesty.
Yes.
One strives to respond fittingly in each circumstance. And that does mean I don't go around saying, oh, yeah, look at those broads.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Of course I don't say
Right.
that, because even if I were carrying around that sort of attitude, it still wouldn't be decent to say it.
No, but I think there's a kind of, to use Larry Chapp's term, there's a kind of canonic form of evangelization where you are willing to, at least for a moment, suspend your ire that this teenage boy just spoke about a woman very
Oh
disrespectful.
no, there's
And
a time
you
and a
are
place for each
going,
of these things.
and you're trying to get past that to what actually, because I chose that movie in particular because that movie has a hold on those kids in a way that when that happens, it's very, very important to take notice of what keeps coming up over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. Well, I think,
And like I guess just my concern is that I'm a big fan of decency, I'm a big fan of modesty, but when there's a tendency to let that stand in the way of going into the depths of Hades with the student.
Yeah. Well,
to bring the real world there, I guess.
But that's the thing is this is an act of knowing yourself, your situation, and the person you're addressing.
It will require prudence.
It is a judgment. It's why Jude, right, in his letter, Jude says, on some convince some who doubt.
Yeah.
Others have compassion with mercy. And others yank them out of the fire, like hating even the garment. There's a place for each of these things. Sometimes you really do have to tell people exactly where they are.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to say, I can talk with you where you are. And sometimes you just have to say, we can just talk about what we're talking about. It'll be okay. I mean, you will do each of those things in different situations.
Yes.
And I just think it's important not to just pick one and go with it all the time. Does that make sense?
Right, but my point is that in kind of conservative Christian circles, they do pick one and go with it.
Well, yeah, that's
Resort to
just
decency,
performative
WH.
outrage. That's
It's-
just cheesy.
Yeah.
But
And I was, when you walked up, I was like, oh my gosh, I lost him. That was a bridge too far for a second.
No,
He just
no.
gets
No.
up and walks
It
out.
was,
I was trying to wave Evelyn into the room earlier.
She had to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. But
But that's, I guess what I was trying to do was sort of riff off of your bring the language into everything, because it is reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a larger, so that's a good example, because it also speaks to a confidence of what we at least should have to offer. It's like, oh yeah, we can, if we know what we're about, we can watch Wolf of Wall Street together, because we know what we're about, and we can bounce off of it, and we can,
Yeah.
And analyze it in terms of the language that you're learning in
Yeah.
class.
Well, sure. I mean, you don't do a career in lit crit without that.
yeah.
I grasp that, but you do still have to be able to do the other thing too.
Sure.
If everything
The other thing being
becomes, if
policing the
everything
boundaries.
becomes a distanced, we can explore that together move, then they will lose the sense that you were trying to commit to earlier, that at heart you know exactly what you're there for. They will lose that sense
Right. Yeah.
if they get the feeling from you that everything is a we can explore that together.
Yeah.
They need to understand that at bottom, there's something in you that's going to yank up the reins at a certain point too. They need to know both of those things are true. Those things have
Yeah,
to be true
yes.
at the same
That's a
time
good
in the
way to
same
put
place
that. That's a good way.
Yeah.
for you to have that moral authority that you need to have if you're going to teach.
They have to have a vision of the castle.
Yeah.
That they
Now,
would be
but
retreating.
you guys are quite right to emphasize, especially with the way Sam just said it there. That you're quite
Confidence.
right to emphasize that if you have if you know how much moral authority you are capable of, if you know how much you really can, and this is an exercise both of humility and prudence, which I think are arguably basically the same thing. It's just say, I know that I'm in the middle somewhere here. I'm neither the maximum possible moral authority,
Right.
nor am I just exploring these things with you. Somewhere here, there are some things I definitely do know, and I'm not going to change my mind about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be able to say that, and at the same time go, but I also know there are more things than I know, and there are more ways of expressing them than I've yet thought about. And so I need to be able to there's a play of contingency and actuality, potentiality and actuality in all of these things, right? And the challenge I was trying to get us back to is, how can we get people to think about moral categories as things that are actual, not merely possibilities of thought?
And that's why I brought up my example.
Right.
Is for a Gen Z moment, for someone younger than me or about my age, what they're listening to and watching to is about as real as their life gets, often.
Which is a deeply problematic situation.
Yes, but in some sense, that's not a bad place for the launching point.
I think touch grass is a much better one. But
Well, I think your perception of grass is going to be informed.
I was
by...
deliberately citing a meme.
Okay. No, if you took my high schoolers and took them out on a nature hike, like, they'd go, okay.
The nature hike would be an artificial performative exercise, wouldn't it?
Yes, right. And in some sense, a lot of, I can remember a few years ago,
I would prefer to dump them in Africa and make them survive, but I'm kidding.
Come on.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I had a
kidding.
tangible growth in my ability to contemplate nature after seeing it idealized in films. I think there's a way to when you are a teenager, and the most real thing for you is this artificial thing. I'm not saying we pretend like it's not artificial, but in some sense, if the virtues apply here, they definitely apply in the real world, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think if you aren't redirecting that routinely into a register that's outside of the artificially constrained reality, so to speak. There's some scare quotes on reality here.
Sure.
Of these things, I think if you do that, you will be arguing in an artificially constrained false world.
If you never make it out, absolutely.
A world which does not have any of the actual natural creaturely features of a real human.
True. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that feeling people have when they run up against the friction between the things they've internalized from media, from a fake discourse, and their own actual results when they try to act on it, the cognitive dissonance, the ruptures, the professor that I sat across in a group office from, who constantly expressed her guilt over the fact that she wanted to be at home with her new child because it was made her a bad feminist, because she felt that she kept feeling bad that that she was showing up for work and wishing she could be at home with her baby.
Yeah.
That cognitive dissonance, I think, is the sort of thing that you have to find and exploit.
Yeah.
And I think that if we allow ourselves to fall into the trap of assuming that the fake world has enough of the features of the real world to do that well, I think that's a mistake. Having said that, whenever we find those features, we should exploit them. But we should exploit them in the direction of the real world, not in the direction of staying in the virtual world.
No, I mean, and that wasn't what I was saying.
Yeah, I know it's not. I want to be emphatic about that though, because I think that it's terribly important to be a sophisticated. I mean, I'm a lit crit guy. I think it's important to be a sophisticated consumer of messages, of all kinds. And on the other hand, I think that being that has to be deliberately, viscerally, cut the Gordian knot whenever you can.
Okay.
Oriented to get back to what's actual.
Yeah.
Because I think that we can, the thing above all that secularizing culture does is keep us distracted long enough to die.
Yeah. So.
And I think if we accidentally let our education efforts live in that world, that's what will happen, and we will contribute to.
What is actual?
What's actual?
What are you getting them back to? Yeah.
I mean, what's actual?
Yeah.
What's created? What is first
So how
order
are
creation, and what is the hope of the resurrection?
So what does getting them back to creation look like? Because that's still pretty vague to me.
Well, what is first order creation, and what is the hope of the resurrection? Ultimately, it's what is actually your body. It is actually your face-to-face participation together with other people. And then we have derivative and contingent forms of that, like, say, writing a book.
Okay.
That's a derivative and contingent form of participation with people. It helps us to participate.
Yeah.
But if we reverse that order, if I say that writing a book is what's the important thing, not
No.
right?
Well,
If I try to live just in the book, and what's the guy who wrote? Saban something. Not Jennings, that's the character, but text. It's a book about text. No, it's a book about text and bookish culture. Well, I can't remember now. Brilliant and challenging to me because he makes the case that bookish culture is itself a contingent phase of culture, which I think is useful to grapple with.
Yes.
I still think that the extended textual discourse is much more of a via media between mere oral culture and hyper visual culture. But you should say I can't choose a contingent means and choose to stay there. I have to get back to bodies. I have to get back to bodies. To what bodies do. To eating, breathing, and shitting. Like, I have to get back to bodies. Because in the end of the day, even when you go to the beatific vision, you know what you're going to do with it? Get back to your body. The beatific vision is not the end. The resurrection is the end. And I think that's the crucial thing, is recognizing that our bodily existence, not which arguments we can make best, even no matter what our starting points, is the crucial thing. So if I'm going to talk about, yeah, of course I can talk about anything. I can talk about Wolf of Wall Street in terms of that. But what I have to be doing to make that work is not going, let's skate on the media culture thing and talk about this representation, that representation. I have to get back to, okay, what happens when you do that? What happens if you try to live with that in your body as a living human being, not in a virtual world that you're going to keep riffing? Just like not just in books.
Yeah, I get the impression I didn't make my point based on what you're saying. Like, and I know Sam's ready to go. And
yeah, we should wrap. Just think of this as be pushing back on the idea. I don't think we can let people be okay with where they are if where they are is lost in competing images.
I guess
because I think that is a real lostness. It's a lostness to their own creatureliness.
I can't see a way that you're bringing in analysis of the virtues to a piece of literature or a movie or a record.
Mm-hmm. That's
by definition not enfolding that thing into the real world you're alluding to. If you're actually bringing the virtues into it, that's why I'm kind of confused.
Only if you track those virtues back to the bodily, the embodied reality, the face-to-face reality of the people that you're talking to. Because if it stays at the level of these virtues exist as kind of virtual labels, annotations on a YouTube video in the virtual world, then what you've done is you've virtualized those words.
Virtual
you've taken
virtues.
those words out of the context of lived experience and turned them into labels for media consumption. So what you have to do
but those
is
labels
track
only
them back
have
from the virtual to the real.
But those labels only have intelligibility insofar as they refer to the real world.
Yes, and so long as you never lose hold of it, lose track of that, what you're saying will work.
Right.
That's the part I wanted to make very explicit.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like
we don't concretely disagree. I was trying to be emphatic about something that I thought was tacit.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that was probably just my brain and sort of relationship to where I am between food and coffee and nicotine and all the various different things that keep my brain going.
No, we should wrap. I could do this all day. I literally could do this all day, but it wouldn't become more intelligible all day. It would become less intelligible all day.
But do you see how I was just sort of confused as to why I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's why it's very hard to bring in. That's why it's very hard to bring in the bookish culture thing because I think it's important to recognize that this happens in every. This is what we were saying about great books culture earlier.
Yeah.
I can't just expect that you can live in this discussion of all of these great guys' ideas, and that's going to make you better. I can't expect that. And in the same way, I can't expect that playing a kind of comparative motivations game with movie characters is going to make you better either. I have to get it back to you and what you will do.
Yeah.
What are you practicing in your life? What habits are you forming?
Right.
If I don't do that, then the rest is just titillation. It's just intellectual intoxication.
Yeah.
And I say this as a serious addict for intellectual intoxicants. Okay?
Really?
Oh yeah, I'm in recovery, man. Okay. All right. That was awesome, guys.
That was great. That was really great.
I'm glad that we, even if because the problem is we agree so much, it would be very easy to just repeat yourselves to each other and never get into it.
We don't want to do that.
So trying to tease out some change in perspective, I think, is very valuable.
Yeah.
And I think they're there.